Okay, so now we are on rec. So hello everybody. My name is Giulio Menegus. I work for the University of Padova, TESAF department. We're here today to talk about iSwamp. It's a small project in the Interreg Alpine Space that started in September 2022, but it's going to finish very soon at the end of this month. As you may know, if you're here, the project is based on the conservation of small wetlands in the Alps. And so I guess I can start right away from sharing my screen and see the presentation for the common part of the project. So I'll try to be as quick as possible. If you see that I'm going too long, please tell me. And also I will ask Lenka and Yuri if they see someone trying to enter the meeting to let them in. They should be able to do it as co-organizers. So thanks for being here at this webinar. The webinar is called The Activities and Outcomes of iSwamp, Integrated Small Wetlands of the Alps Monitoring and Protection. My name is Giulio Menegus, and I'm here on behalf of TESAF department for the University of Padova. The project is co-funded by the European Union in the frame of Interreg Alpine Space, and it involves three alpine countries, let's say. One is Italy, with the University of Padova. One is Slovenia, with the Institute of the Republic of Slovenia for Nature Conservation. And the third one is Austria, which is represented by the Geopark Karawanken, with the help of Eco Institute für Ökologie, which is also, in this case, Geopark representing Slovenia, since it's a transboundary entity. We can start right away with showing some pictures of wetlands. I try to put something in all the three countries involved. And say that obviously when we think about wetlands, we tend to think about water, and this is correct. Obviously, we may be thinking about ponds or small lakes, maybe with some wet areas in the surrounding. But the fact is that this is just a reduction of what wetlands are in ecological definition. In fact, this is a wetland too. And here the presence of water is quite less evident. And the same will be said for this peatland in Cadore. So even you can come here, you see that you can feel that the soil is wet, but you usually don't find open water habitats. And other wet areas can be different too. So the fact is that the term wetland can be seen as an umbrella term that can describe different environments that must be obviously tied by a common definition. And we can take this definition from this book, for example, Wetland Ecology by Paul Kedby, and it summarizes, let's say, the common ideas about how to define a wetland. And we can say that a wetland is an ecosystem that is characterized by the regular or permanent inundation by water, meaning that the soil can be waterlogged or flooded. And this presence of water has an effect on the soil that becomes mostly or frequently anaerobic. And this anaerobic soil, in turn, can and usually selects a vegetation that is adapted to flooding. So maybe the main thing to say about wetlands is that they are an ecosystem, places on the earth, habitats where we can find plants that are adapted to the presence of water. And there are 6 categories of these habitats. In fact, we can recognize at least 6. Then obviously we can go much more into detail, but we can see these parts, these 6 categories at first. The first being swamps. A swamp is a place that can be rarely flooded during the year, for example, after the winter, or in the case of intense rain events, for example. And it is an environment that usually is not, at least for most of its part, is not covered with water. And so these kind of habitats tend to be dominated by trees, not any kind of trees, not any species of trees. Obviously, there are some groups, some genera, some species that are more adapted to this kind of environments. For example, ashes, willows, alders, and usually these kind of environments are, or maybe I should say, were commonly found on the valley floors. Even if, for example, in my area, the Venetian Dolomites, this kind of habitats is now very, very reduced. Then we can see the wet meadows. These two are environments that are not always, not frequently, let's say, flooded. In fact, wet meadows usually are rarely flooded, but for a long period of time enough that the plants that live in there, that should be in most cases grass-like vegetation, so vegetation without wood, so that these plants must be adapted both to the presence of water and to the lack of water. And yes, there is a huge variety of this kind of habitats. Here I put some Filipendula meadow, but yeah, you can think of it as a meadow, a prairie that is somehow wet or sometimes wet, let's say, and the plants are adapted to this. Then we have marshes that are on the other end of the limits on the frequency of flooding. In fact, usually marshes are very frequently flooded, if not always. They're usually located on the valley floors in nutrient-rich environments. They tend to be dominated by monospecific stands of some grass-like species. One example can be this sedge bank here in the area of the geopark, in fact, but other examples can be reeds or tifa plants. So when you get to a place that is usually flooded, and then sometimes it's not, but usually it's flooded, and you have monospecific stand of usually tall grasses, it's most likely you find yourself in a marsh. Obviously, this is a simplification. Then we can go to the category of peatlands that are usually subdivided into two parts: the fens and the bogs. But they are united by their, let's say, their functioning, their functional ecology. In fact, both environments are usually permanently waterlogged, at least outside the winter season. And the presence of water without important variation in the water level leads to the accumulation of dead organic matter, such as dead plants, usually. And this leads to the accumulation of a layer of soil that we call the peat, and hence the name peatlands. The difference between fens and bogs usually can be found in the fact that fens are mostly fed by groundwater. So, for example, by springs or water tables directly, and they also usually found in lower areas in the landscape. So, for example, in some valleys, small valleys or holes, let's say, and they tend to be dominated by grass-like vegetation. One example can be obviously this beautiful blooming of Eriophorum, which is typical not only of fens, obviously, at least not all the species, but this is in the sedge family. So we have a lot of grasses, a lot of sedges, so Cyperaceae families, and so on. And on the other hand, bogs tend to be peatlands, fens, that are very old. So they started as fens, and in the meantime, peat accumulated to a level that the water table could not reach anymore the upper level or upper layer of the soil. This leads to a particular situation when most of the water feeding the environment is rainwater, so precipitation water, let's say, obviously rain and snow, and in some other cases, other events, precipitation events, obviously. These environments tend to be dominated by mosses called sphagnum mosses. It's a genus of mosses that tend to build these small hammocks that you see on the bog area, and they tend to be reddish. We're going to see a bit more later, and obviously it's a peatland too, so it's permanently waterlogged. There is accumulation of peat, but the main group of species is mosses. Anyway, obviously, you can see that something else can grow on these mosses. Last but not least, maybe the easiest type of wetland to think about is shallow water bodies. Usually, we don't put inside wetlands big lakes or rivers. They tend to be treated in separate categories. But at the same time, shallow water bodies that have a low water level, let's say, for example, 25, 30, 50 centimeters, 1 meter, tend to be more similar to swamp or marshes environments than to big lake like, I don't know, Lake Garda, etc. So obviously, this kind of environments can be both permanent or temporary. And there's a big group of different types of vegetation that can be found in this kind of environments. Why did we worry about wetlands? The main reason is that wetlands are nice, obviously, but they're also important. For example, they provide a lot of ecosystem values, maybe the most important being the fact that they're an important habitat for biodiversity in different groups. We're going to see something in a few slides. There are important ecosystem services, if we want, or values that are essential to our communities. Let's say, for example, the reduction of flood risk. This is, for example, the case of small lakes and ponds that tend to be like also marshes and other environments tend to be like a sponge absorbing, for example, excessive water during heavy rain events. Obviously, I don't know if you knew it, but wetlands provide clean water because they act as a filter to precipitation water, for example, or discharged water. They're important, especially when we think about peatlands for carbon storage, because a lot of peat is accumulated in peatlands, and this peat contains carbon. And obviously, there are many other facts, like it's important for climate, because they regulate microclimate. It's important for science. It's important as a source of resources. It's important for agriculture, for recreation, for tourism. So we have a lot of roles in our societies. And as I said before, they host a lot of species. We can give a look at a little group of animals. For example, you find dragonflies. Most of you know that dragonflies fly, obviously, but their larval stage is aquatic. And in the 80 species of alpine dragonflies, most of them actually tend to reproduce in small wetlands or wetlands. There can be a lot of amphibians for the same reason. You obviously know that tadpoles, but also the larvae of newts are aquatic. And then there can be also groups that one might not expect. For example, terrestrial beetles or earthworms, birds, obviously. But one nice example is the one of butterflies that are not directly linked to water, but they are linked to plants living in wetlands. So, for example, this is the case for this beautiful and very rare and protected Euphrydrias aurelia. For the plants, there is no group of plants of the wetlands. Let's say there are many groups in which there are some genera or species that are well adapted to the presence of water and to some other problems given by wetlands. One example can be the Carex genus in the let's say sedges, in the sedges family. So normally, every time you visit a wetland, you can find at least one species of genus Carex. That's not always true, but most time, yes. There are some environments that are wetlands that tend to be very poor in nutrients, and so they host, for example, a lot of carnivorous plants or orchids that have different adaptations that will help them survive in this kind of situation. There can also be some interesting but maybe less known species, such as the bog bean Menianthes trifoliata. So why did we work on wetlands? The main fact is that wetlands are disappearing. It appears that they have lost more than half of their cover worldwide in the last centuries. And this obviously had an impact on their biodiversity. For example, there is this Living Planet Index that is made by WWF that showed that the vertebrates, so for example, amphibian species, mammals, birds, etc., that live in wetlands lost about 40% of their population size on average, obviously, in the last 40 years. So the situation is quite grim. And the same can be said, obviously, also for the Alps. This is the reason why we decided to present this project. So wetlands are disappearing, but we decided to focus on small wetlands because they are less protected usually, because they're more easily destroyed, and obviously because they are still important for biodiversity and ecosystem values. For example, there was a study made in our project area a few years ago that showed that 18 small ponds had more dragonfly species than a single one that in area had more than the same cover, let's say. So sometimes defending this, protecting this kind of small environments is very important. It's crucial for biodiversity conservation. And last but not least, usually they're easier to restore. So our idea was that maybe we could do some pilots, and other people could do the same interventions in other areas or in other municipalities, regions, etc., in the Alps. So we pointed out a specific objective that is to roll out a method for the integrated conservation of small alpine wetlands. And when I say integrated, I mean that must be based on 3 pillars: science-based conservation, instruments and training for stakeholders, and obviously the part of education and dissemination. This is the reason we are here today, for example. So science-based conservation, I meant that we chose a group of sites. We surveyed these sites, studying their biodiversity, and then we decided some restoration interventions, some actions that could provide a better situation for these environments or for their biodiversity. We are working, and we worked on providing instruments and training for stakeholders. For example, in the next weeks, we're going to have the final version of a protocol that we prepared to help, for example, municipalities or landowners to decide how to monitor or to restore this kind of habitats. And also we already organized, and we're still organizing sessions for stakeholders. Last but not least, there is this communication and dissemination part dedicated to schools and the general public. When I say schools, I say that we have prepared a booklet that is now available on our website. So please Google iSwamp if you're interested. And the booklet is available in 5 languages: English, French, German, Italian, and Slovene. And it is available in the PDF version. It has part of theory and the part of workshops that can be a valuable tool for educators and teachers. So